This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome our very distinguished panel of witnesses and thank you for appearing today to discuss what your agencies are doing to enforce export controls and how Congress can enhance enforcement efforts to prevent our adversaries from illegally acquiring advanced technology. I also want to thank Ranking Member Romney and his staff. The Ranking Member will be here shortly. We are in the middle of votes, but I want to thank them for working with us on this hearing and the months of staff oversight that have led up to today. I appreciate our continued partnership to address emerging threats to our nation. To our witnesses, I look forward to hearing from each of you about trends in export control violations, your agency's unique role in enforcement, and how better agency coordination can help prevent our adversaries from accessing sensitive technologies. We look forward to hearing more about actions that Congress can take to prevent advanced technologies from flowing to bad actors while still working to maintain the United States' innovation edge and our place at the center of the world's economy. By breaking our export control laws and acquiring sensitive U.S. technologies, our adversaries can grow their military and cyber capabilities. This represents a considerable threat to the United States' national security. This is why over the past few years there have been significant efforts to improve U.S. export controls as authorities work to constrain efforts by countries like China to acquire sensitive dual-use technologies. This focus is important, and I've been glad to see the administration consistently roll out updated guidance and export controls for emerging technologies. However, there's always more work to do. So it's incumbent on Congress to ensure the effectiveness of actions taken by the executive branch, especially as it relates to interagency coordination. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses about their efforts to enforce export controls and how Congress and the federal government can work together to keep the American people safe, secure, and free. So, I will recognize Senator Romney when he returns from voting for his opening statement, but what I thought I would do is get us started on testimony, and then when he comes, we can break for his opening statement. So it's the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if you will all please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you very much, and please be seated. So our first witness today is Eun Young Choi. Ms. Choi is the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. Before overseeing export controls at the National Security Division, Ms. Choi was the inaugural director of the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. In this role, she set strategic priorities to address crimes involving cryptocurrencies and digital assets. Welcome, Ms. Choi. You are recognized for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chair Hassan and distinguished staff of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. I joined the National Security Division this past July after spending over a decade at the Department of Justice, 8 years of which I spent as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, focusing primarily on cyber investigations, including those implicating national security. And just before joining NSD, as you mentioned, I was the inaugural director of the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, which focuses on the criminal use of digital assets. The work of NSD is increasingly focused on responding to the evolving and dynamic threats posed by sophisticated nation-state actors such as China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These countries have sought to acquire sensitive technologies, including not only military hardware, but also emerging technologies, such as advanced computing and autonomous vehicle capabilities, as well as the components upon which these technologies are built, for instance, semiconductors and microelectronics. Such technology, in the hands of our adversaries, risks undermining U.S. and allied military capabilities. It can also be exploited by repressive regimes to conduct surveillance of civilian populations, suppress dissent, and enable human rights abuses. Enforcing our export controls and sanctions laws is critically important to countering these threats to our national security and requires interagency, international, and private sector cooperation. The Justice Department plays a central role in those efforts, investigating and prosecuting criminal violations of those laws alongside our law enforcement and interagency partners. This interagency partnership is at the heart of the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, which was established in February 2023 under the leadership of NSD in the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, and is designed to pursue enforcement actions against those who engage in the illicit transfer of emerging technologies. The strike force consists of 15 cells located across the country, made up of local federal prosecutors and agents from 4 agencies, including the 2 represented here today, the FBI and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. In close partnership with NSD's Counterintelligence and Export Control Section, these local cells investigate and prosecute companies and individuals who violate U.S. laws governing the transfer of technology. And their work is supported by an interagency team of analysts who coordinate case leads and identify opportunities to generate new leads. Since May of 2023, the strike force has investigated and charged 16 cases across 7 cells and has secured guilty pleas from 4 defendants to export, smuggling, and money laundering charges. These cases include the arrest of a defendant who allegedly was engaged in a years-long scheme to illegally send sensitive technology, including semiconductors, to a Russian entity with ties to the Russian military and the FSB, using a network of transshipment points in Hong Kong and other countries to try to evade tighter export controls put into place following Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine. The strike force also announced charges against 4 Chinese nationals who allegedly smuggled U.S. origin items that could be used in the production of UAVs, ballistic missile systems, and other military end uses through the use of front companies in China and Hong Kong for the benefit of the Iranian armed forces. We recently marked the 1-year anniversary of the strike force by bringing together the local cells to Phoenix and holding a summit focused on case studies, best investigative practices, briefings on cutting-edge technologies, and 1-year reports of their efforts. The work of the strike force builds upon the success of the Task Force Capture, an interagency task force dedicated to enforcing sanctions, export, and trade restrictions that the United States has levied in response to the Russian invasion. The task force's successes to date include seizing, restraining, or obtaining forfeiture judgments against almost $700 million worth of assets belonging to Russian oligarchs and others who unlawfully supported the Russian regime and evaded U.S. economic countermeasures, and charging more than 70 individuals and 5 corporate entities accused of sanctions evasion, export control violations, money laundering, and other crimes, many of whom have been arrested in more than a half-dozen countries. To that end, we've been leveraging our international partnerships to follow leads, track down perpetrators, and make arrests around the globe. Curtailing the flow of sensitive technology to our adversaries is a global problem, and it demands a global response. Finally, private sector partnership is critical to our work. Companies are on the front lines when it comes to export controls and sanctions. Their decisions as to how, where, and with whom to do business can be just as important as our criminal enforcement actions. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these issues with you and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And Senator Romney, we just started testimony. We can go through with it, or you can make your opening statement.
Continue.
Okay, thank you. Our next witness is Kevin Kurland. Mr. Kurland is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Export Enforcement at the Bureau of Industry and Security at the Department of Commerce. He previously served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Undersecretary for the Bureau of Industry and Security. Before joining the Bureau of Industry and Security, he worked as an international trade analyst at a U.S.-based law firm. Welcome, Mr. Kurland. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Chair Hassan, Ranking Member Romney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify on the Commerce Department's ongoing efforts to enforce U.S. export controls. I currently serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Export Enforcement at the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security. When Congress passed the Export Control Reform Act of 2018, or ECRA, it provided BIS with robust regulatory as well as administrative and criminal enforcement authorities that export enforcement leverages every day to protect U.S. national security. At Export Enforcement, our talented law enforcement agents and analysts are focused on a singular mission: to keep our country's most sensitive technologies out of the world's most dangerous hands. Thanks to the authorities granted under ECRA, we have powerful tools to identify, disrupt, and investigate any violations of our controls. No federal agency, and quite frankly, no other country, has so expansive a toolkit to enforce export control rules. At no point in history have export controls been more central to our national security than right now. The most recent annual threat assessment published by the intelligence community reaffirms that nation-state actors, especially China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are the most pressing threats. It also identifies transnational threats that can result from the misuse of disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence. Accordingly, export enforcement's mission is laser-focused on preventing sensitive U.S. technologies from being used for malign purposes by these nation-state actors. We do this in three primary ways: prioritization of our enforcement efforts on the most pressing threats, expansion of our partnerships at home and abroad, and aggressive enforcement of our controls. My full testimony provides additional details on each of these lines of effort, but I'd like to highlight a few key initiatives and actions that illustrate our effectiveness. First, we have prioritized our analytical and investigative work to match the evolving threat environment. We have updated our procedures for initiating enforcement leads and opening investigations to focus on the technologies, end users, and end uses of most concern. We have been responsible for the addition of significant numbers of Chinese, Russian, and Iranian procurement-related parties to the entity list, including ones announced just this morning. And we conducted over 1,500 end-use checks last year in over 60 countries, the highest number ever, with the overwhelming majority targeting Chinese, Russian, and Iranian procurements and transshipments of concern. Second, to expand the effectiveness of our robust enforcement authorities, we have partnered with industry and academia, other agencies, including the intelligence community, and like-minded countries to prevent diversion. We work closely with companies and universities to ensure they understand our rules and to warn them of illicit procurement efforts. We launched the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, which BIS and DOJ co-lead in partnership with HSI, FBI, and DCIS to prevent nation-state actors from illicitly acquiring our most sensitive technologies to advance their authoritarian regimes and facilitate human rights abuses. We established export enforcement coordination mechanisms with Canada, the EU, Five Eyes, and G7 counterparts. And we organized a disruptive technology protection network with Japan and South Korea to replicate the disruptive technology strike force model abroad. Third, we have aggressively enforced our controls in a way that imposes real costs on those who seek to violate export controls and undermine U.S. national security. Our criminal enforcement efforts with DOJ last fiscal year resulted in the highest number of criminal convictions and number of months in prison on record. On the administrative side, we resolved or imposed the highest number of administrative cases, denial orders, and temporary denial orders, including the largest standalone administrative penalty in BIS history, a $300 million penalty against Seagate for continuing to ship millions of hard disk drives to Huawei, a party on our entity list, without BIS authorization. My testimony provides additional examples of high-profile cases dismantling illicit procurement networks involving China, Russia, and Iran, as well as of firearms traffickers. Let me close by reaffirming that the work of our talented staff of 200 agents and analysts in partnership with industry, other agencies, and international counterparts has never been more important and is achieving significant results that directly protect U.S. national security through aggressive enforcement of U.S. export controls. I thank the subcommittee for its support and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurland. Our third witness is James Mancuso. Mr. Mancuso is the Assistant Director of the Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, Global Trade and Investigations Division, and Director of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. Before his current role, Mr. Mancuso served as Special Agent in Charge for HSI Baltimore. He also has served as the HSI Attaché to the United Kingdom and Ireland. Welcome, Mr. Mancuso. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Hassan, Ranking Member Romney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss export enforcement and the vital role Homeland Security investigation plays as it stands at the forefront of U.S. counterproliferation investigations and the enforcement of our nation's export statutes. The enforcement of export control laws has been a critical element of U.S. national security dating back to 1789, when the first United States Congress and President George Washington created the United States Customs Service to interdict contraband enter the United States, collect duties, and enforce our fledgling nation's trade laws. HSI formed under the Homeland Security Act of 2002, remains steadfast in its 234-year-old mission of enforcing our nation's export control laws. HSI is a principal investigative component of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, enforcing more than 400 federal criminal statutes. The mission of HSI is to investigate, disrupt, and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and national security threats seeking to exploit the customs and immigration laws of the United States. HSI consists of more than 6,800 special agents assigned to 235 domestic field offices, 93 international offices in 56 countries. HSI is designated as the primary law enforcement agency charged with investigating violations of U.S. export laws related to military items, controlled dual-use goods, and sanctioned or embargoed countries. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of the HSI Global Trade Division and the Director of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, or IPR Center. The Global Trade Division provides oversight and support for investigations of U.S. import and export laws to ensure national security, protect the public's health and safety, stop predatory and illegal trade practices, and prevent sensitive U.S. technologies and weapons from reaching transnational criminal organizations and foreign adversaries. Global trade components include the Counterproliferation Investigations Unit, the Counterproliferation Mission Center, located in Huntsville, Alabama, and two whole-of-government centers, the IPR Center and the Export Enforcement Coordination Center, or E2C2. HSI, through its CPI program, brings to bear significant resources against sophisticated illicit procurement networks, which operate globally on behalf of transnational criminal organizations and other malign nation states, attempting to acquire U.S. military items and controlled dual-use goods. HSI's broad authorities, combined with its extensive global footprint, has allowed its special agents to forge partnerships with domestic and international law enforcement communities. This is proving critical when illicit procurement networks exploit vulnerabilities in the global supply chain to circumvent laws for the purpose of illegally obtaining controlled goods and technologies. Combating the illegal export and proliferation of sensitive technology, equipment, and weapons is an operational priority. Last year, the CPI program initiated over 1,500 investigations, made nearly 700 criminal arrests, worked with the Department of Justice to secure 371 indictments and 292 convictions, clearly demonstrating HSI's unwavering commitment to national security. The Export Enforcement Coordination Center was created in 2010 by executive order and serves as the primary forum within the federal government for executive departments and agencies to coordinate and enhance their export enforcement activities. HSI serves as the executive agency designated for the administration of E2C2 and is responsible to house, lead, manage, and fund the initiative. The E2C2 provides a whole-of-government approach to enforcement by ensuring interagency coordination, promoting multi-agency collaboration, and minimizing duplicative efforts, and strengthening the critical link between law enforcement, the U.S. intelligence community, and export licensing entities. As a result of these partnerships, approximately 15,000 deconfliction requests have been processed by the E2C2 since becoming operational in 2012. Export enforcement is critical to achieving our national security and foreign policy goals. HSI, through its CPI program, is uniquely positioned to effectively work with its partners in a unified effort to enforce our nation's export control laws. I appreciate your interest in this important topic and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you all three for your excellent testimony. Senator Romney is going to submit his opening statement for the record, so we're going to proceed to questions now. And I will start with a set of questions and then turn it over to Senator Romney while I go vote. So to all three of our witnesses, in your testimony, you each highlight the important and unique role that your agencies play in enforcing U.S. export controls. Your agencies are working hard to protect our national security, but unfortunately, our adversaries are nimble and they are constantly finding new ways to circumvent U.S. export controls. Just this week, we saw concerning new reports that show how Iran is utilizing U.S. technology in weapons that it uses and exports to extremist groups and other hostile actors around the globe. So I'd like to hear about the new tactics that adversarial states like China, Russia, or Iran are using to avoid U.S. enforcement efforts and illegally obtain sensitive advanced technologies. And Ms. Choi, we can start with you.
I think it's important to recognize, and I appreciate that question, the interconnected nature of many of these adversaries. One way to think about it is for countries such as Russia and Iran, where U.S. economic countermeasures are quite comprehensive. They have incredibly robust procurement networks that involve transshipment points and the use of front companies across the world, including in jurisdictions where it's sometimes difficult to hold people criminally accountable, such as, for instance, in our view, China and Hong Kong, along with some of, in the recent months, or in the recent years now, since the start of the unlawful invasion of Ukraine, the countries that surround Russia, right? So I think one of the trends we're seeing is just how robust these procurement networks are, and we're doing the best that we can to try to find, from the DOJ's perspective, instances where we can identify willful participants of these in these procurement networks and holding them accountable to ensure that we can disrupt their ongoing flow of goods.
Thank you, Mr. Kurland.
So, Madam Chair, what I would say is, we are focused on the activities of nation-state actors like China, Russia, Iran, and particularly their acquisition of advanced technologies, disruptive technologies, AI, biotech, advanced compute, quantum. And I think what's important to understand is these countries have both the intent and the resources to seek to acquire these items through any means necessary. And that's what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's licit acquisition or illicit acquisition, through cyber exfiltrations, through theft, through the use of shell companies, through transshipments, through shell companies. And this is a whole-of-government effort where they have resources, and maybe in the case of China, almost unlimited resources to seek to acquire these goods. And so what we're doing as an interagency is, we're fighting back by basically leveraging the authorities and resources that we have across the interagency through this disruptive technology strike force model. The idea is, how do we get together Commerce and HSI and FBI analysts to identify how our adversaries are seeking to illicitly acquire those items, and then get prosecutors and investigators in cells all across the country to prioritize enforcement actions against those activities. And we've had a significant amount of success just in the first 15 months that the strike force has been in effect. 16 criminal cases have been brought. Just last month, we had one involving a Google employee who was stealing AI software and technology to take it back to China. So their whole-of-government response requires us to be as similarly nimble and active to share our limited resources and our comprehensive authorities to go after those threats.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mancuso.
Much like my colleagues here at the table have expressed, it is a whole-of-government approach. And that's one of the things at the E2C2 where we really rely on each other's unique authorities and different investigative methodologies and strategies to attack this problem set. I'll go to a different direction and talk a little bit about partnership engagement with private industry. At the E2C2, we are regular.
So I want to just stop you for a minute, because what I was trying to get at was how China, Russia, and Iran are trying to avoid our enforcement efforts. And then I want to move into the topic about kind of how we're responding to that.
Sure. So when we're talking about the relentless efforts of our adversaries,
right,
they're constantly attempting to acquire these components, this innovation, this creation, this technology. And it's important for the government to have that conversation with the industry. No one knows their customer base like private industry.
I see.
So
yeah.
When they're receiving a one-off request, when they're receiving something outside their normal supply chain, and their red flags kind of go up, that's when we need to have an honest conversation with them. And we have the ability, a two-way conversation, not just a one-way conversation with the government. So we start there, and then when we receive intelligence or referrals from our private industry partners that this may be a request from a bad actor, that's when law enforcement's involved. That's when we work with our industry partners and all the agencies. And then we do what we do best. We investigate that allegation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mancuso, another question for you, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Romney. As you know, many of our foreign partners rely on their customs agencies to enforce export controls. frequently those customs agencies are not law enforcement agencies, and they may not have the authority to take direct action against criminals. As a result, there may be delays in turning intelligence into enforcement actions. How does this situation impact Homeland Security investigations operations? How could Congress better enable HSI to act against international criminal organizations that break our export control laws?
Well, thank you for that question. And the subject of international overseas customs officers is very dear to me, since I had the opportunity, the privilege to serve as the attaché to the United Kingdom at the embassy in London for 5 years. So HSI has invested a tremendous amount of resources and efforts into a very healthy overseas footprint. And what it's allowed us to do is strategically align ourselves in different regions with our international partners to combat this. Now, as legacy customs officers, I understand the challenges of working with our customs partners. So one of the things I would say is we as an HSI have looked at threats, and we've been able to realign our resources to address today's threats. For example, we now have 4 HSI personnel in HSI Taipei. That was a strategic decision we made as an agency to counter the threat from China. Conversely, in HSI Bucharest, we now have a presence there before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they are working, spending an incredible amount of time hand in hand with our Ukrainian customs counterparts, recovering weapon systems from the battlefield, exploiting those weapon systems to see are there U.S. components in those, and if so, how do they get there? So it is an incredible challenge. Thank you for your interest in this, and how could you help? I think one of the ways you could help would be ensuring that HSI and our FY25 budget, HSI is fully funded, therefore giving us the strategic ability to adjust resources internationally, the ability to turn on a dime and pivot not just today's threats, but the threats tomorrow and 5 years down the road. So thank you for just that topic.
Well, thank you. And I will return to this in another round of questioning with our other witnesses. Senator Romney.
I'm going to yield to my colleague, Senator Scott, who has a hard stop on the other end.
I want to thank the chair and ranking member for hosting this hearing. Thanks each of you for being here. Thank you for what you do. Mr. Kurland, I personally don't believe that the United States should be doing any business with Communist China. The CCP is not an honest trade partner. Just recently, we learned more about details about American business executives being trapped in China with an exit ban just for civil litigation, business disputes for as little as $7,000. They steal our intellectual property, use non-market economic practices to destroy our businesses, harness our technology and innovation for their military to defeat us, want to make the world dependent on Chinese-run technology. They cut corners at every turn, from the labor they use to poisons they put in their foods that they knowingly export to America. Every U.S. dollar spent there supports the CCP's military and its horrific human rights violations. Based on the BIS country report for China, in 2022, only 7% of export licenses for tangible items, technology, and software were denied. A whopping 3,249 were approved, and another 980 were returned without action. Approvals for licenses to export to China remain at historically high levels. Do you think this is an approval rating that we should be comfortable with?
Senator Scott, first of all, let me say that I share your concerns about China's illicit procurement of U.S. technology, particularly to support its destabilizing military modernization programs and mass surveillance programs. I'm on the export enforcement side of the House, not the export administration side of the House that does the licensing. What I can tell you is on our side, our team is focused to prevent and deter China from illicitly acquiring technology to support these destabilizing programs. It's why we've stood up the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. We have been using the administrative enforcement authority that we have under the Export Control Reform Act in an aggressive manner. We have imposed the highest standalone civil penalty in our history just this past year against a party that was selling hard disk drives to a party on our entity list called Huawei, $300 million penalty. We've imposed the most temporary denial orders in our history in just the past year. In addition, we continue to aggressively use our entity list to prevent China from getting access to key technologies. There are over 800 companies, Chinese companies, that are already on the entity list, in addition to 6 that we are adding tomorrow. They were announced this morning, 4 of which are involved with providing AI chips to China's military modernization programs. They're going on the list tomorrow, in addition to 2 additional parties, along with UAE counterparts, that were providing components to the Russian and Iranian UAV programs. Lastly, I'll say is we've been working with our interagency colleagues, in particular FinCEN, to receive from financial institutions suspicious activity reports that we can also action into enforcement leads with regard to China's evasion of our controls. So we are systematically focused on preventing China from getting access to those technologies using all of the ECRA authorities that we've been authorized.
So if you look at the numbers, it seems like there's a basic presumption of approval rather than a denial. And the denials, it seems like it's an anomaly. Do you believe that there should be reforms to the BIS review process so there's going to be better parameters in place to affect a presumption of denial as opposed to the seemingly baked-in presumption of approval? And look, and we also know the hardware is only as good as what's running on it. But it seems the BIS list is porous and clunky to deal with the panoplies of threats that should be addressed for export limitations. So number one is, do you think we ought to have presumption of denial with anything with regard to China? And number two is, do you think this, how do you consider software for inclusions on the list?
So, Senator, every license application that goes through the commerce system gets reviewed by the Department of Commerce, Department of State, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense. And it also gets intelligence information added to it. So there's a fully informed decision that is being made by an interagency body on each one of those activities. Each one of those licenses are reviewed de novo, if you will, on their own merits, based on a refresh of information that the Department of Commerce and our interagency colleagues have in terms of determining whether or not this is a reliable recipient of U.S. items. And that's the basis on which those licenses are reviewed. In terms of, software and
Still a pretty big number, right?
I'm sorry?
Still a pretty high number.
Well, certainly, Senator, there is a lot of trade between the U.S. and China, and so there's a lot of licenses that are received in the system, but it also shows that there's a lot of licenses that are subject to our control that are undergoing that 4-agency scrutiny to determine whether or not there's a reliable recipient on the other end.
What about software?
So, certainly software in terms of its control is something that we control in addition to commodities and technology itself. It's an intangible, but it also goes through that same licensing process. So it doesn't matter whether it's IP or software or a widget that you can hold. All of those transactions go through our system, through all 4 agencies, in order to make a determination on whether to approve.
Sure. Let's talk about TikTok. I just saw a report this morning that that when you look at TikTok and compare it to Instagram, and you look at the messaging on Instagram versus TikTok, it's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Chinese government is targeting us. They're targeting our kids. They're targeting us. Every citizen gets on there for the news. It's not a little bit biased. It's complete. There's nothing on TikTok about Tiananmen Square. There's nothing on about Tibet. That's all supports the pro-Hamas. It attacks Israel. I mean, it's complete. It's not a little bit. It's complete. So knowing all that, do you believe that TikTok ought to be banned?
Senator, I'm going to defer to my colleague from the Department of Justice on the topic of TikTok.
Okay.
Senator, I think the Department of Justice and its leadership would agree with your characterization of the national security threats that are posed by TikTok. It's our view that TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance, are presenting a clear and present danger to our national security. We are in support of the Foreign Adversary Controlled Application Bill because it covers both TikTok and any attendant or subsequent applications that may have similar concerns with regard to foreign adversary control of our data. There are 3 different ways in which we think it's a concern for national security. First, in particular, TikTok as you mentioned, collects vast amounts of personal data from more than 170 million Americans who actively use the platform. It also relies on a proprietary algorithm that was developed and maintained in China to determine what content to show and what content not to show or to suppress to its users. And third, TikTok continues to rely on PRC-based source code and employees to support its US operations. And we think that the national security threat in this regard is even more urgent because of the Chinese government's growing use and focus on its AI capabilities.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I'm going to ask some questions now, and then when the chair returns, she'll, I think, provide Senator Langford the opportunity to speak, and then we'll finally get to Senator Blumenthal. A couple of questions. There's a great deal being written about the degree of leakage, if you will, of things that are not supposed to be exported from our country or from our friends that are somehow getting in the hands of adversaries of one kind or another. How great a problem do you think that is? I mean, how much, how many, I mean, is this a tiny share of those things that are most sensitive, or is this a pretty significant problem that we need to address? And any one of you can respond to that. Maybe I'll go over to Mr. Mancuso, which is this, and I realize we got a lot of things in the list, and so some things they're not terribly interested in, but I'm thinking particularly about large-scale chips that go into AI or other key defense technologies. How much of that is getting through, do we think? Is this, are we a sieve? Are we, you know, not really a sieve, but drip, drip, drip? What's kind of the characterization of what's getting around our export controls?
Well, thank you for that question. I can say this, as the Assistant Director for Global Trade, I think the sheer volume of legitimate trade far outweighs the illicit trade that's going on. However, that small slice is of concern. So what you have is you have folks at this table, all the 20 partners at the E2C2, the intelligence community, all of us are completely laser focused on retaining America's innovation, our creativity, our intellectual property right. We develop the most advanced weapon systems in the world. Because of our ability to create this, we are the envy of the entire world. That also means our adversaries will stop at nothing to obtain this technology in these weapon systems. So with that being said, we are focused on this issue. We are an investigative agency looking at these agencies, attempting to disrupt and dismantle the flow of this technology. And it concerns all of us. Like I said, we're focused. I'm also concerned the day that they don't want our technology, the day that we aren't the world leader, because that means that they've surpassed us and they've become superior. And all of us at this table are laser focused, making sure that day never happens.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that with regards to AI in particular, it's very difficult to control the software. And some software on AI has already been put on open source and represents, in my view, a huge breach of poor judgment or breach of good judgment, and it is poor judgment. And there are some who believe that the only way we're going to try and keep AI from being used in a most negative way is if we limit the supply of the chips necessary to operate AI. Are we able to do that successfully, or is it like, no, we really can't? Mr. Kurland, do you have a sense of that?
So at BIS, Senator, we have been imposing controls not only on entities that are involved in these types of diversionary attempts, but we have over the past year and a half rolled out a series of significant countrywide controls on China, in addition to parties not only that are resident there, but there are actors that are sitting in third countries as well. It is a complex problem set, and certainly with regards to the semiconductor ecosystem, where the vast majority of chips that are produced offshore, trying to identify potential violators is something that we all here are working hard to do, using all source intelligence, putting together analytical cells that are trying to identify those activities, working hand in hand with industry to both prevent on the front side, and then if there are violations, to have penalties that are high enough to deter others is critical. We've been doing that as an interagency. We've issued over a dozen multi-sealed documents just in the past year and a half that's trying to get at this problem set, is how do we get industry to harden their supply chains and their distribution networks? And then we're working globally, internationally. Chair Hassan mentioned, some of the complications of our international partners. In most of these jurisdictions, the licensing folks are actually disconnected from the enforcement folks, right? And that creates a bit of a gap because the enforcement folks don't know what's coming into the system that's being licensed, and the licensing folks don't actually know what's going out, which is the biggest vulnerability, the things that should be coming into the system that aren't. And so we've been working very closely. We have attachés similar to HSI that are stationed now in 10 countries around the globe, trying to get our international partners to increase their capacity to identify and then take enforcement action in coordination with us. It's a challenge, but we're using all the tools at our disposal, industry, interagency, international, to try to get at making sure that these key technologies aren't getting into those hands. And where we identify it, we're either using criminal enforcement, administrative enforcement, or as I mentioned just this morning, we added 4 companies to our entity list in China that were explicitly diverting AI chips to the Chinese military weapons program so that we can alert industry and have them harden their supply chains when they're doing their due diligence of transactions.
And what will the penalties be for those corporations that have been, if you will, shipping those chips into China?
Sure. So they would be subject to criminal and/or administrative enforcement authority. So 20 years, up to 20 years in jail, or $1 million per fine. And then on the administrative side, we have a statutory maximum of $365,000, or twice the value of each violation. And as in the case of Seagate, that resulted in a $300 million penalty to set a deterrence level to say, we expect companies to put in place internal compliance programs where they're screening their transactions, and then when they find a problem, to come to us voluntarily through what we call a voluntary self-disclosure to tell us. Because if they don't do it, and there's a willful action or there's knowledge, then we're going to take aggressive action to try to deter others from shortchanging, and also putting those that are investing in compliance programs at a competitive disadvantage. So we want to level that playing field at the same time.
Ms. Choi, who's been the most successful in being able to get the key technologies that are vital and we have endeavored to restrict? Is it China or is it Russia? We read stories about Russia being able to get technologies that they're using in Ukraine. At the same time, we read about China. Just today, we've read more stories about China getting advantage of our technologies. Are they equally effective, or is one more effective than the other?
Senator Romney, I would say that I would refer you to the IC's annual threat assessment, which focuses on China's efforts in particular. I would say both of those countries pose concerns, but with regard to China, that threat assessment notes that China seeks to become a world science and technology superpower and to use this technological superiority for economic, political, and military gain. And among its various methods to do that, it includes means to acquire or steal IP, its cyber operations, and its illicit procurement. So I would say China is laser focused on trying to advance its science and technology program, and it's a focus for us at the Department of Justice.
Thank you. Senator Langford.
Mr. Romney, thank you. Thanks for all your work. This is a lot of behind-the-scenes, very technical, very legal work that makes an enormous difference for the country. So I really do appreciate the ongoing work on this. I have a question about Huawei. We've talked about for years in trying to be able to limit the proliferation of Huawei around the world and communication systems, now in their partnerships for chips development and such. Huawei's become a $100 billion company. So the question is, are we being effective in limiting them? Can we show real progress in future limitations for Huawei getting into our allies' systems and into American systems? And how do we actually show that as a metric for how we're protecting us, our technology, and our allies? Anyone can step in on that. I want to be able to take it.
So, Senator, as you know, Huawei is a significant national security concern for us. They have been on our entity list since 2019. I think
Yet they're still getting bigger.
well, our entity list isn't necessarily aimed at preventing their growth.
Right.
It's aimed at preventing them from misusing U.S. technology for their malign activities. And I think We have a level of confidence that our entity listing, in addition to the use of the foreign direct product rule, has had a significant impact on their ability to leverage U.S. technology to conduct their activities. And where we've had an opportunity to enforce our controls against Huawei, we've done it. I've mentioned the Seagate case twice, but it's I think an example of how aggressively we're identifying violations as it relates to Huawei. We have another case as well that we resolved back in 2021, I believe, involving Huawei. We're focused on preventing them from getting our tech.
Okay, I get it. And I don't want to be flippant to say your focus is to be able to stop them from growing. I understand they're a Chinese company, they're going to continue to grow. Our focus is try to keep them out of the systems of our allies and to keep them from stealing our tech and our technology as well in the process. The concern all along has been the next Huawei, the other company that's coming up. Obviously, we have a lot of focus on Huawei at this point. Do we know at this point the next company that the Chinese are using to be able to basically do the exact same thing and to be able to go after technology? When you're doing the entities list, it is whack-a-mole all the time on it. So how is that going as far as identifying those next companies?
So what I can say, Senator, on that question is, we are lashed up with the IC on a daily basis. We are reviewing information. We are evaluating trends that are happening in China, and we are amending our controls when necessary, both in terms of countrywide and entity-wide, or entity-specific, I should say, to address those concerns. And we've done that with regard to advanced compute, semiconductor manufacturing, a number of their key parties in terms of both equipment manufacturing and semiconductors themselves have been put on our entity list. These actions do retard and delay their capabilities, but should we identify the next champion, it's certainly somebody we will actively review, A, to determine whether or not they're involved in violation of our controls, but B, whether or not we need to take some other regulatory action against them to prevent their access to U.S. tech.
It's just a process question, and that is getting the information out to different companies to let them know, hey, this entity's now on our entities list. Because that's changing all the time, have you been able to evaluate how quickly companies are able to get the information, process it? Is there an expectation to say within the next 15 days, 30 days, 90 days that the changes are made in this? Because some of them may be in the middle of contracting in the process when they actually discover that. Walk me through the process of how that's actually distributed out to companies and how quickly that can turn around.
Sure, Senator, I'll answer it two ways. One is from the government perspective, and then one is from the industry perspective. When we put parties on the entity list, we are working hand in glove with CBP and HSI to identify then transactions the next day that would violate our regulations, and then we both have authority to detain those shipments, or if they're moving, to have them redelivered. So we have the ability to immediately take enforcement action against shipments that are moving in violations of our regulations. In terms of industry, obviously, they're published in the Federal Register. I'm sure industry
Everyone reads the
may
Federal
not
Register
reading it
every
every
day.
day, for sure. But one of the things that we have made available is something called the Consolidated Screening List, which is a list of all the prescribed parties that is updated in real time from Treasury, State, and Commerce, that companies can simply just download into their IT systems. There are commercial systems as well, but it's a free service that we offer where companies can just download that immediately and they get notification. They can sign up through our website for notifications of updates. They can download it so that their screening system immediately picks up those changes. So those are some of the ways that we're working. It's also a way for us to make sure that, in particular, small and medium-sized enterprises, which may not have the resources to expend and buy commercial software for these entities, can simply just import that information for free into their IT system and have an automated way to screen their transactions.
For enforcement itself, and you've talked about that there are criminal penalties, obviously, for selling to those on the entities list. How quickly do you start enforcing those penalties? Because you may put it on the entities list today. There's a contract that they actually do 3 weeks from now. Is that a criminal penalty that comes in? I'm not being flippant about it, trying to be able to find out how quickly we're able to actually move from it's there to we need to do enforcement to be able to stop, and how quickly it moves to major fines versus this is a contact to you to say stop. You may or may not have known.
Senator Langford, that's actually a very important point. I would note that criminal enforcement is a very important part of the enforcement rubric, but with regard to penalties in particular, that doesn't happen until after we've adjudicated the criminal prosecution, right? So we have to bring charges.
Right.
There needs to either be a guilty plea or a trial, and then there has to be sentencing. And so the penalties are oftentimes, somewhat distant from the original sort of understanding of the problem, but there are many non-criminal sort of circumstances or examples in which that information could be helpful. For instance, as Mr. Kurland was explaining, if there was new information that was available to a company that may prohibit them from entering into that transaction, that's still disrupting a potential opportunity for there to be an export violation, because we are looking for opportunities short of criminal prosecution to stop and disrupt that threat.
Sure. Grateful to do that. Thank you. Thanks for the questioning, Tom. I may follow up with you on some questions on university students that are foreign students here in the United States. That's a growing population that we're not going to try to cut off all foreign students here, but there are challenges that are there when they're involved in research, and there may be the possible transfer of technology or information as well. And I'll try to follow up with some questions for that. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Senator Hassan and Senator Romney, for your leadership on this subcommittee. As you may know, I'm chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. We're conducting an investigation into the flow of parts and components, semiconductors, chips, to Russia. I recently visited Russia, as a matter of fact, with Senator Hassan, and in the course of a meeting with President Zelensky, he handed me a folder with documents, photographs, charts showing me how prevalent American chips and other components are in Russian weapons that they have recovered on the battlefield. Our own military and intelligence community confirms that the flow is prevalent and pervasive. So this issue is, at one level, very complex and challenging, and at the other level, it's very simple. This system isn't working. This system is not working. And I want to know why. That's the purpose of the investigation we're conducting. Our subcommittee's inquiry shows data reflecting significant jumps in the export of products from 4 of the largest United States manufacturing companies: Intel, Texas Instruments, AMD, and Analog Devices, to 5 countries neighboring Russia: Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Finland, Turkey, in recent years. Exports to these countries increased by huge orders of magnitude between 2021 and 2022. For example, we found exports to Kazakhstan rose by more than 1,000%, and they're continuing to rise. So, Mr. Kurland, I'm assuming that you're aware of these trends, the increased flow of United States technology to these countries, eventually becoming parts of Russian weapons used to kill Ukrainians, correct?
That is correct, Senator.
And have you asked the State Department or one of our agencies of government, whether it's Treasury or some other country, to bring increased pressure on these countries?
So there's a whole of government effort, Senator, to bring pressure on these countries, particularly that are outside the coalition. We have a coalition of 39 countries that have agreed to impose substantially similar controls on Russia. The vast majority of these shipments that you're referencing are coming from countries that are outside of the coalition, countries like China, UAE.
I mentioned 5 countries that do not include China or UAE.
Yeah.
I mentioned countries like Finland and Turkey, that now Finland is part of NATO, Turkey is part of NATO. Other countries depend on us. So I'm assuming that more can be done. And you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Kurland, that we've been providing, quote, guidance on spotting red flags and implementing best practices to prevent diversion to private industry. What are those red flags, and why aren't they working?
Sure. So we have been working diligently with industry to provide them with as much information as we have about the evasion tactics of Russia. Some of those tactics are companies that didn't exist prior to the invasion now exist and are receiving items. That requires some enhanced due diligence. Or they were receiving items unrelated from
Let me just come right to the point.
Sure.
Don't you agree that these manufacturers, American manufacturers, have to know, looking at these trends, that something is awry here?
Well, I think, Senator, that this is a complex supply chain, but industry needs to do more, and we're trying to do more. We're using our entity list as aggressively as possible. I personally, over the past few months, have signed out over 40 letters to the major distributors, manufacturers, and express carriers, identifying in addition.
I have no question that you are doing your job, and you're doing it as well as you can, and you're doing it expertly and with consummate dedication. My question is, are the private companies reacting positively and promptly enough?
I think there is a general recognition that they need to do more. I share your concern that they need to do more.
By
and we have
general
been
recognition, do you mean on their part or our part?
On their part, I have been personally talking with the major trade associations, with major companies. I know even our undersecretary has been reaching out. There's a recognition that these components are ending up in places that they shouldn't be. We need industry to do a better job of hardening their supply chains, and we're making specific asks of them to try to do that. Taking a look at these lists of companies and stopping voluntarily to sell to them. Putting together more effective distributor relationships so that they can track who the actual end user of these components are. There's a lot that they can do that we're encouraging them to do.
And I apologize for interrupting, but as you know, my time is limited. When you say you're encouraging them, you know, as the saying goes, talk is cheap. There's the blunt instrument of criminal prosecution, which is very difficult to do. People can say, oh, well, we ought to prosecute them, but obviously there's mens rea and intent and all the difficulties of doing an effective prosecution. I was a prosecutor for quite a few years, not minimizing the difficulties, but aren't there more effective instruments other than jawboning that can be brought to bear here on private industry or on the countries that are complicit, because they are not completely immune to economic pressure and other kinds of pressure that has real-world consequences in dollars and cents or otherwise?
Well, we have increasingly been ratcheting up our controls. That is on the other side of the Bureau, Senator. I'm on the enforcement side of the House, so I can speak specifically to how we're addressing the evasion of our controls as they relate to those that are in place. And that's why we're out talking with industry. We're giving them as much guidance as possible. We're providing them with lists. But as our controls change, you know, we will effectively enforce those controls as well.
My time has expired, but I would appreciate an opportunity to follow up with you on these issues. And again, I appreciate the work that you're doing on this very difficult topic. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Chair Hassan, and of course, Ranking Member Romney, for your hard work on this really important committee. And thank you to the witnesses for being here and testifying today. I want to focus my questions on artificial intelligence and, of course, its potential role in aiding in our enforcement in this area and so many others. Because one of the issues this committee in particular has been focusing on is how government use of AI has the potential to dramatically improve how effective and efficient government is. whether it's cutting waiting times for Americans seeking support from federal agencies, federal workers using data to root out fraud, and focus their efforts on going after bad actors. So, to all of the witnesses, how can data analytics and AI tools improve export control enforcement? And where are your agencies in the development and the adoption of these type of tools for this purpose? We can start with you, Ms. Choi.
Thank you for that question. The Department of Justice recognizes, as you do, Senator Rosen, that there's tremendous potential in the use of AI to improve the way in which we are defending our national security or protecting the American people. With regard to export controls in particular, I'm sure that my colleagues at the table will be able to discuss more specifically the ways in which AI could be harnessed in the export control investigations portion of our criminal prosecutions. From the Department of Justice's perspective, we are making sure that we're looking at AI as a tool, especially when it comes to litigation, to see if there are ways in which we can use it to generate leads, but also to do the data analytics that we need to when it comes to evidence, when it comes to documents, including in the export control realm because of the tremendous amount of documents, for instance, that are in other languages. Unfortunately, I can only speak a few, so we want to make sure that prosecutors can understand and digest that evidence. I would note that, we're looking at also from the Emerging Technology Board and within the Department of Justice to ensure that we have safeguards so that we're using AI in this manner at the Department of Justice. We can protect the rule of law and make sure that people's rights aren't violated as a result.
Thank you.
Senator, having access to AI is a critical function for us to have access to do our job more efficiently and more effectively. The amount of data that we have available to us, whether it's classified, open source, government data, is vast. The ability for AI to be able to synthesize that information for an analyst at a terminal and to be able to use that to predicate a law enforcement lead that would result in identification of a violation would be incredibly powerful. I can say at the Department of Commerce, we don't have the resources at this point to be running AI in that manner. Currently, we are running a pilot, but the money even that we're using for that pilot for AI is not from our base. And we've asked in FY25 in our budget for a $3 million down payment to keep running this pilot running. Mm-hmm. But I think we are in agreement with the study from CSIS that talked about infrastructure backbone for BIS. To have an infusion of resources that could upgrade our capabilities, our IT capabilities, particularly
IT
on
modernization.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I just
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
few minutes, so I'm going to, because I have a few other questions I want to ask. Please, Mr. Mancuso.
Well, that's a great question. And in terms of what we're doing with HSI and looking at our threats overseas, folks that are trying to go ahead and steal our technology and our creativity, we go through in HSI, some of our customs counterparts, our international partners, a tremendous amount of trade data, looking for those anomalies in the trade data. Criminal networks are constantly shifting and adjusting their tactics to stay one step ahead. So AI would potentially give us the ability to go through vast volumes of data and identify those one-off anomalies, which could be an indication that there's a transshipment or an end user is going to repackage that and send it on to an adversary. It's interesting. It's a topic that's top of mind. And in the president's latest executive order, we were named the IPR Center to kind of our part for helping out industry on the intellectual property side. So what we did is we commissioned a study with Michigan State University's Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection. And we're going to reach out to U.S. businesses and say two things. How can you harness the power of AI to protect your intellectual property? And what are the top threats to your organization from AI? So these are things we're working on. I'm excited to release those
We'll look
studies.
forward to seeing that. But I want to talk, in the time I have left, about the dual-use technology investigations, because American firms, honestly, were really at the forefront of the AI technology revolution. And earlier this year, actually, I've done it for the last few years, I led a Senate delegation to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Multiple companies unveiled to us their new semiconductor chips. Last year, the Biden administration announced restrictions on the export of AI chips and manufacturing equipment to China in order to limit China's access to advanced semiconductors related to AI. So, Mr. Mancuso, I'll go to you. Given the rapid advancement in AI technology, the importance of the semiconductor chips in supporting the more powerful AI, these large language models, all this amount of data, what resources do you need to keep up with the expansion?
Well, thank you for that question. And there's no doubt that AI is evolving at a pace that's hard to keep up with. So what we're doing at the E2C2 in this space is working with our partners here at the table and the 20 other partners. And in terms of resources and commitment, thank you very much for that. Again, I would go back to the FY25 budget and ensuring that HSI is funded to go ahead and give us the resources and the flexibility to think strategically and to prepare for this and to put resources in place to meet that challenge. And again, thank you for that, your leadership and interest in this topic.
Well, I'm going to ask Mr. Kurland more broadly, what other dual-use technologies do you see as high risk? And really, how should we help you as the federal government prioritize these technologies? Because there are a lot out there. What do you need? How can we help?
So, Senator, thank you. You know, we're really focused on the key disruptive technologies that have been identified by the intelligence community, AI, biotech, quantum, advanced compute. From our perspective, you know, we believe that if we have more resources, we've been able to demonstrate under the Ukraine supplemental, when we have more analysts, we're able to identify more violations of our controls. When we have more attachés overseas, we're able to conduct more end-use checks that identify diversionary activities. And those predicate our law enforcement leads. And when we have more agents, we're able
So
to
we have
bring
to
more
partner
enforcement
AI with the
cases.
common sense of humans.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Rosen. I do have some more questions, so I appreciate the witnesses' patience this afternoon, and I appreciate the questions that my colleagues have asked as well. I want to go back to the question I left off on, which was really about international cooperation. And to Mr. Kurland and Mr. Mancuso, recent reporting noted that Russian manufacturers have been importing machine tools that are made in Taiwan and then using those tools to produce weapons. Taiwan is a strategic U.S. partner and should be working with U.S. authorities to counter Russia. So how can we get Taiwan and other international partners to be more proactive in countering Russia? And Mr. Kurland, we'll start with you.
So, Madam Chair, I think it's important to start with that Taiwan is a member of the Global Export Control Coalition, which means it has committed to imposing complementary controls, as 38 other countries have done. And it's a critical player in the global semiconductor supply chain and other key technologies like machine tools. And so anybody that is a member of this coalition allows us to, A, influence them because there is a need to harmonize controls, but also bring together our enforcement elements for cooperation and build their capacity. And that's what we've been doing. I just actually came back last month from Taiwan, speaking with officials. How can we help them build their capacity for enforcement and implementation? We have an export control officer that is stationed there, that funded on a one-year Ukraine supplemental. We've asked the Congress in FY25 to actually make that position permanent, but we have a person that's working every day with the Taiwanese authorities to get them to increase their capacity. And they actually have done that. In February, they amended their controls. They now have controls on 77 pieces of machine tools. But that's the model that we're using with other close partners and allies, which is when you're part of the coalition, there's an expectation that you're going to keep pace with our changes in controls and that you're going to effectively enforce. And so we're working through our attachés overseas to help build that capacity.
Thank you. Mr. Mancuso, anything to add to that question?
I believe this is a great question. Thank you. I believe earlier I discussed how HSI made a commitment to have four HSI personnel stationed in Taipei. And the mission there is to work alongside with their law enforcement but it's also capacity building. It's also the greater partnership effort. It's sharing of best practices, and it's really being a good partner. And that's what we're doing, HSI officers overseas, agents overseas are doing. We're working hand in hand with our international partners. If it's important to them, it's important to us, and vice versa. So it's establishing these critical relationships on a global basis so we can all rely on the global community to combat this threat. We cannot do this alone. The United States clearly, and our partners here at the table, we cannot accomplish this alone. So you have to rely on your committed global partners and and then demonstrating by investing with our agents there, we're demonstrating our commitment to them, and this in time will breed success.
Well, thank you. Now I want to turn to kind of a follow-up on what Senator Blumenthal was asking you about, Ms. Choi. So we know how important it is that the private sector, research institutions, and academia share information with law enforcement about our adversaries' various attempts to break export control laws and illegally gain access to critical U.S. technology. We understand how important it is that they share information with law enforcement, and that private entities that engage in cutting-edge research and development uphold the law, protect intellectual property. So what is DOJ doing to coordinate with private entities to prevent violations of export control laws and stop adversaries from illegally accessing advanced technologies?
Senator, I appreciate the question. The Department of Justice also believes that really companies are in the forefront of our efforts to protect national security in the ways that you have described. In a variety of different lines of effort, we have been engaging with companies in order to ensure that they are incentivized to come forward, be it through our voluntary self-disclosure policies, to notify the government and notify the government when they see things that are happening within the confines of their business that would be of concern or potential criminal activity. We also think it's very important to provide them with the actionable intelligence that they can use to strengthen their own compliance systems, because I think prevention is always going to be a better solution, be it in the export control realm or in cyber when it comes to trying to protect your intellectual property. And so I know it's with regard to the export control realm, the Disruptive Technology Strike Force has been having a series of private sector engagements, including having fora at various large cities to try to bring industry that are in that area of jurisdiction to explain trends that are happening within that area and that industry. But in addition, we are ensuring that we have compliance notes, which we had discussed earlier. So there is, again, actionable intelligence that companies can use to arm themselves. The flip side of that is when companies are willing participants in criminal evasion of our sanctions and export control laws and other criminal violations. We are enforcing corporate, or we're focused on increasing and making more robust our corporate enforcement regime as well.
Thank you. I have a few more questions, but I wanted to turn to Senator Romney if you have more questions.
Yeah, I'm going to ask an open-ended question, which is what you would recommend that we do, if anything, to reduce the flow of technology from the U.S., particularly that which has been limited by export controls that nonetheless is finding its hands in Russia, China, and other places, in part because it's so critical now with AI. It's always been important, but now with AI, it's the national security implications of us not being able to manage the super semiconductors that go or that are necessary for AI is really extraordinary. And I wonder whether, I mean, I'm going to offer suggestions. One is more coordination among different agencies in the U.S., whether we need to do a better job and establish some type of entity that does more coordination. Another alternative, which is putting more burden on the shoulders of companies. So chip manufacturers, I mean, Intel, AMD, TI, and so forth, analog devices. I mean, given the fact that we just heard from Senator Blumenthal that there was a 1,000% increase in shipments to a neighbor of Russia of technology, which is ultimately clearly going to Russia. I mean, there could be a requirement that on particularly highly sensitive items, not all the items that we put export controls on, but on certain highly sensitive items, that a corporation must track where it's gone and where it is and be able to provide that information to somebody to say, all right, yeah, this is where it is. And if they don't do that, that we fine them heavily or provide other sanctions. I hate just finding more requirements for you guys and trying to say, well, we got to get more money to you, because we all know that dollars are hard to come by at the federal government level. So how about, say, to corporations, if you're going to see ship something of high sensitivity to some nation that's not part of the coalition, then you have to track where it is and be able to report to us how much you've sent, to which company, and where those items have gone. And that means putting people in that country, tracking it, determining through an audit whether it's done. I mean, I'm looking for what are the solutions to this, because it ain't working now. There's a great effort on our part, but they're finding ways around it. So why don't we just go down in the order that you each testified with any suggestions you have as, very briefly, if you were king for a day, what should we be doing differently than we're doing, legislatively or else, or in other ways?
Senator Romney, with regard to your specific thought regarding the burden or the changing standards as it applies to corporations, I'll defer to Mr. Kurland on that. I know you said that you understand that resources are scarce. If I could just illustrate one example of the resources that are required to do these sophisticated cases. In one sanctions case alone I'm thinking of, there are multiple petabytes of data which we had to analyze for one criminal case. We simply are at our wits' end when it comes to resourcing and doing the big data analytics that we know our adversaries are doing with our data. We need to be able to do that and be armed to do that. And so I would have that in mind when you're thinking about resourcing in the FY25.
Thank you.
One other thing that's maybe not so obvious but is very important to us is the reauthorization of Section 702. It's absolutely vital to all of the national security work that we do, but in particular, I think it's important to highlight that in certain instances, we've been able to glean insights into the illicit transfer of technology and goods to hostile foreign state actors through the use of that particular tool. We'd be happy to give you more details in a classified setting, but that is incredibly vital to every single thing that we do day in, day out.
Thank you.
So, Senator, I can't respond to policy prescriptions. I'm on the enforcement side. What I can commit to you is that if new actions are taken, we will commit to aggressively enforce those. From our perspective, that requires, more analysts, more attachés overseas, more agents that are working with DOJ to bring criminal cases, and it gets back to that IT issue as well. Better IT systems so that we can create efficiencies to identify these violators and then more quickly be able to bring those cases, whether it's a criminal case, whether it's an administrative case, whether it's an entity listing. We have the authorities. We've never worked better together as an interagency in terms of E2C2, Disruptive Technology Strike Force. They are working in a complementary manner and sharing those resources. But the more resources that we have, the more effective we can be.
Thank you.
Well, the important first step was today. We're having a hearing highlighting the importance of this. And number two, HSI is we're not a policy agency. We're not a regulatory agency. We're an investigative agency. So as I've mentioned earlier, just ensuring that we have the resources to do what we do. And we are, like I said, we have a very healthy global footprint, and we're working every day. The men and women of HSI are working with our international partners. And to continue that, I believe that, again, is a recipe for success. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Romney. I want to keep going at another aspect of this issue of how we work with private entities. As we have heard during this whole hearing, the Export Enforcement Coordination Center does really important work coordinating interagency enforcement efforts and ensuring that information is shared among federal agencies. However, private entities don't have access to most U.S. export data, making it more challenging for them to conduct due diligence and avoid working with bad actors who are trying to violate our export controls law. Is DHS considering ways in which it could share more data with U.S. companies, with research institutions and academia to help them protect themselves against accidental violations of export controls?
Thank you for that question. I think the answer is we're always evaluating what we're doing well
Yeah.
against what we could be doing better? That's a question we ask ourselves every day, and we can never become complacent. We do have an aggressive industry outreach. We do have Project Shield America, where we are actively speaking to thousands of companies every year. We're going to research universities. We're talking to
Right.
them. So that is one thing we're doing. Could we do it better? I'm sure we always could.
Yeah, again, this isn't a question about better. I share all of my colleagues' respect and real gratitude for the work that all of you and the people you work with do. What I'm trying to get at is, do we have a way of sharing actual data that these entities could use? Or
In
is
certain
DHS exploring it?
Sure, in certain circumstances, but we are limited to some of the law enforcement sensitive data that we sit on, and there are limitations what we can legally share with our partners. We share with private industry to the greatest extent possible. That is part of a two-way conversation, but there are limitations on what we can share and how we can share it. So we do to the greatest extent possible, but there are limitations.
Okay. Ms. Choi, the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, which was created last year, works across federal agencies to coordinate with global partners and enforce export controls. As the strike force continues into its second year, how should it expand its collaboration with more of our partner nations?
Senator Hassan, that's an excellent, or Chair Hassan, that's an excellent question. We are trying to increase our international cooperation in a variety of ways. As was previously mentioned, there's an effort underway pursuant to the Camp David meeting between the president and leaders from Japan and South Korea to ensure that we are well equipped to help strengthen those other countries' export control regimes as well, because export control regimes, at least from a criminal perspective, it's very important for our authorities to be aligned and for the violations to be of the same kind in order for us to have the maximum impact for disruption. We also have, as a matter of course, through the every criminal investigation that we have, we leverage the global footprint of both the Department of Justice and the international law enforcement agencies that we work with and their presence abroad in the export control realm.
Okay, so we heard earlier that just today, Commerce listed 2 UAE firms for supporting Russia and Iran's drone program. Is DOJ considering embedding personnel in hotspots for export control evasion like the UAE? And if so, does the strike force need additional resources or authorities to do that?
Senator Hassan, I don't know about the specifics of the UAE information that you just outlined. I would say I'm not aware of a particular effort from DOJ to enhance its UAE presence on export controls. I will say I'm aware of many different engagements with UAE on a variety of different issues, including export controls. Again, we can always do more with more, so to the extent that we'd have further resources to allow for that travel and to build that those partnerships and the muscle memory with our international partners, we would look forward to receiving that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kurland, earlier you mentioned that BIS would be adding 6 new entities to your agency list because they were providing AI tech to China. Can you tell the subcommittee more about the efforts to undermine, more about their efforts to undermine export controls? How egregious were the violations? What additional action should we be taking against those entities or individuals who are working for them?
So, Senator, there are 4 entities that will be listed tomorrow for seeking to acquire AI chips for China's military modernization program and military intelligence end users. Addressing China's whole of government approach to acquiring these advanced technologies is something that we're all focused on a day-to-day basis. And it requires significant resources, analytical, overseas. You were just mentioning attachés that are overseas. We currently are located in 10 countries, including UAE and key transshipment countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan, to prevent those types of diversions, and then to help us identify enforcement outcomes when those are identified.
Okay, I want to follow up with you. I mean, and maybe we'll learn more tomorrow, but what we're really trying to get at is a sense of what these entities are doing, because that helps obviously inform us about what the next steps are and how we can be helpful. I am again out of time. Do you have any more questions? All right, so I have 1 or 2 more, and I thank you guys again for your patience. Mr. Kurland, an end-use check is when the Commerce Department physically inspects an export-controlled item in a foreign country to ensure that the item will not be used for illegal purposes. After a request from the Commerce Department, foreign governments have 60 days to allow U.S. inspectors to conduct end-use checks in their jurisdictions. If a foreign government doesn't allow end-use checks within that time frame, the Commerce Department can take away export licenses. So how does the Office of Export Enforcement share data with law enforcement regarding countries that delay end-use checks? How does interagency data sharing help inform sector-specific enforcement and private industry engagement?
Sure. Well, thank you. You explained the program perfectly, Madam Chair, in terms of our law enforcement investigators doing these end-use checks. First, let me say that the majority of our partners around the globe ask for a list of who we're going to do checks at, and many of them also participate on those checks. We currently have no issues with regard to conducting checks anywhere around the globe. We had an issue back in October of 2022 that resulted in a change of our regulations, which you were referencing, as well as a policy that Assistant Secretary Axelrod issued that said that if a host government, in that case it was China, didn't schedule a check within 60 days, because we had a backlog, we would put them on our unverified list, and then our regulation change allowed us to move them to the entity list, which basically imposes a license requirement on any item subject to our regulations if those delays continued. And I'm happy to report that based on that regulation change and the policy initiative, that it has spurred the government of China to eliminate the backlog and to continue to cooperate with us. So at this point, we are not having any issue globally with conducting checks, and we have tools in place to spur foreign governments that might attempt to delay completion of those checks.
Well, that's good to hear. We have had a very comprehensive discussion, and I'm very grateful for the three of you for spending so much time and sharing your expertise with us. I want to thank you for joining us today, but I also always like to give witnesses a chance to highlight any aspect of your work, in this case on export control enforcement, that we didn't cover. And if you feel like we've been comprehensive, you can say we're all set, but I just didn't want to leave today without giving you each a brief chance just to touch on anything we haven't gotten to today. So I'll start with you, Ms. Choi, and work right down the line.
Thank you for that opportunity. I would just say that we remain very focused on export controls. I think we've covered a lot of topics today, and so I'll probably cede the rest of my time. But certainly, I would just like to reemphasize that we appreciate your leadership and yours, Senator Romney, and your focus on this particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Kurland.
So, Madam Chair, I would just say that at Commerce, we continue to be focused, singularly focused, on protecting U.S. technology from being misappropriated by our adversaries, and to the extent that we have an ability to do more. If the Congress is able to provide us with additional resources, our FY25 budget request, in addition to requests that have been or are identified by NGOs in terms of the Kyiv School of Economics, AEI, CSIS, all have identified the fact that if we have more analysts, we have more ECOs, export control officers overseas, we have more agents, we have better IT systems, we can be even more effective as we're laser focused on this problem set.
And thank you. And Mr. Mancuso.
Just want to thank, on behalf of the men and women of HSI, especially the folks in the CPI realm, all of our men and women at the E2C2 and in Huntsville, Alabama, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. You asked some great questions, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, not only for your testimony today, but for everything you and the teams you work with, the men and women in your agencies do to help secure our nation. I look forward to continuing this conversation with my colleagues and constituents, and I know you've given all of us a lot of ideas and identified some new problems for us to solve. We appreciate that. The hearing record will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on April 25th for submissions of statements and questions for the record, and this hearing is adjourned.